Matt, I want to finish off our conversation with sort of a moving forward kind of lens of, as you've said, you are the veteran, if you will, of multiple government shutdowns over the years, and we're in the middle of this now. But moving forward, I want to ask for your take on what lessons should policymakers take from this? Should voters take from this? What do we make of all this that can help inform public policy and budgetary debates in the future to hopefully improve them in some way?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that voters say might take from this is, and this is really hard to do, because I think people don't sort of tend to view politics through this lens, is consider closely the type of people that they elect, right? Like, there are increasing polarization between the parties. The Republicans are tending to be more conservative, more Trumpy, if you will. Democrats definitely trending more liberal. As the parties go to their respective corners, it's harder and harder to find agreement. And as I suggested earlier on, there's some sort of internal dynamics of the nature of partisan power in DC that drives the parties towards disagreement. Right? If you are a member of the current minority who thinks you're a couple of seats away from being in the majority next time, and maybe you're going to be a chairman of a subcommittee and getting to write bills and laws theoretically to do X, Y, or Z. Well, you really don't have much incentive to cooperate today. You have more incentive to not cooperate today. So the current majority looks like they don't have their act together. So, from a voter standpoint, some of that just means be careful about who you elect, and if people talk about um, maybe being maybe compromising isn't always a bad word. That those types of folks are people that folks should throw their support to. That's not going to work everywhere, but it's just worth sort of people thinking about what's the nature of individuals that you elect. Are they the type of people who want to reach compromise to do the sort of basic things that the government does without massive deficits or whatever the other criteria you have when you go to the polls?
Matt, something that occurs to me just now as you're describing that kind of relates back to the political incentives as you're describing for candidates for office. And I guess I want to ask you, is there a way that we can, as a nation, shift the political incentives when it comes to election time such that a member of Congress who has a track record of finding consensus solutions, and I know compromise has become such a controversial term. So many feel so often to say, well, it's not a dirty word. It should be viewed as positively. And I think there are folks out there who are worried that compromise means I'm sort of giving in on things I care about to a political opposition that I don't particularly like or trust. That seems to be kind of the mentality. But is there a way as a nation that we can shift the political incentives to where the kind of member of Congress who is able to forge some consensus based solutions to some of these issues, that's actually politically advantageous for them to help them with reelection? Can we shift the incentives in that way?
Boy, I wish I had a good answer for that. Like I said, I think that ultimately boils down to individuals making, sort of expecting this of their elected officials. Um, there's there's a way in which we have a representative government. A it's not a pure democracy in the sense that the people we send to Washington, vote 100% of the time in agreement with their constituents. They're supposed to make informed judgments when push comes to shove on individual bills. That's a good thing, because the founders talked about the passions of the majority, and all that. You could go read the Federalist Papers and review that. But there's a way in which politicians definitely reflect, the voters of their districts. And we're having a national debate about what's the nature of those districts when you see all these redistricting arguments and all that. But in the end, the laws of gravity, the laws of budgeting will affect the decisions those members are able to make. So if the budget deficit gets so high that we can no longer afford the benefit promises that individuals have made, um, the laws of budgetary gravity say something's going to have to give. You're going to either have to raise taxes, you're going to have to cut benefits somewhere, or people are going to face higher inflation, higher interest rates. All sorts of bad things will happen. I would love to say that there is a political theory, political science way that we will elect better members. I think in the end, in our lifetimes, Nick, unfortunately, members are going to be forced to make better decisions than they have in the past because we're not going to be able to afford to make a lot of the unaffordable decisions that the last generation of members have made. Um, that's that feels a little bit like being on the Titanic and cheering on the iceberg, But in the sense, I think there will be more discipline enforced on the federal government to make better decisions with people's tax dollars than politicians have been making for a while, independent of whether we can figure out some way to elect better members. So that may be a really pessimistic way of answering your question, but I think in some ways, better decisions will be forced on members because we won't be able to afford the really poor decision making that's gone on for entirely too long in this town.
Matt, we've got just 30 or seconds or so left. I want to ask you kind of a final thought as we wrap up this conversation. And this has all been amazingly helpful context, I think, for our audience to understand this issue and what to make of it as voters. And in that mindset, talking to voters, kind of what I take away from all this, and I want to test this with you and ask you to clarify or improve where needed, is that perhaps an ultimate pitch to voters should be, you should want people in elected office who are willing to make quote unquote good decisions now, regardless of what the political makeup is in Congress and the White House and so on, rather than elected officials who want to obstruct until they have more power or following an election or a committee assignment or something like that. Find people who say, we need to find positive steps forward in a consensus way now, rather than holding out for, well, maybe if I obstruct now, I can get something better later. Is that a fair summation, or is that too pie in the sky?
No, I don't think that's too pie in the sky at all. I mean, really, if you think about what the nature of the shutdown is, it is the Congress and the White House, because the president plays a role here, has basically failed at the most elemental responsibility of the federal government. That is, kind of keep the lights on, right? Like the stuff that has to happen every year for basic government operations to go on, for national parks to be open, for passports to be processed, for federal employees to do their thing, for food stamp benefits to be paid, and various things like that. For that to happen, you got to pass a bill that the president signs into law, and that is the bare minimum that taxpayers should expect of their government in Washington. And these folks haven't been able to do that. And, we've talked about the various political reasons and all that. That's great and everything. But from a taxpayer standpoint, I think most people's attitude is, well, just get it together. Just do what you're supposed to do, right? And you can have these debates about should this thing be bigger or that thing should be smaller or whatever, on your own time. But just keep the government operating. And, if it's too much, cut it. If it's too little, increase it. But find a way to do your jobs. And, really, I think that's kind of the disappointment that most people feel. It's probably too weak of a term, but the disappointment people feel on looking at the shutdown, where they just say, can't these guys just get it together? This is the bare minimum that government should do to be able to keep the lights on.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.